There is a number printed on the tag of every plant you own, and for anything growing in a pot, that number is wrong. Not slightly wrong. Wrong by roughly 2 full hardiness zones. So if you are in zone 6 and you bought a plant rated hardy to zone 6, and you put it in a container on your patio, that plant is not experiencing zone 6 this winter. It is experiencing something closer to zone 4. And it will die, and you will assume you did something wrong, and you did not. You just trusted a number that was never measured for the situation you put the plant in. Let me show you exactly what happens, because the figures are more brutal than most people expect. On a night where the air temperature outside is 15 degrees, the soil a foot down in your garden bed is sitting somewhere around 30 to 35 degrees. The earth is enormous. It holds heat, and it releases that heat slowly. A root down there is nowhere near freezing. The growing media in a container on the same night in the same garden can be down around 20 degrees. Same weather, same plant. 15 degrees of difference in root temperature, and that gap is what kills. Because here's the part almost nobody knows, and it is the single most important sentence in this video. Roots are not as cold hardy as the rest of the plant. Not even close. The stems, the branches, the buds, all of that has evolved to shut down and survive winter. Root systems have not. Research going back decades is clear that roots do not appear to go dormant the way the tops of plants do, and that throughout autumn and winter the roots remain the most cold-sensitive part of the entire plant. So every hardiness rating you have ever read is really a rating for the top of the plant, based on the assumption that the roots are safely buried in insulating soil. Take that soil away. Wrap the roots in nothing but 3 inches of potting mix and a plastic wall, and the whole assumption collapses. That is why container plants die over winter in enormous numbers, and why the failure almost never looks like cold damage. It looks like the plant simply did not come back in spring. So today, 5 things. Do them and the plant survives. Skip them, and there is a genuine chance you are throwing that pot out in April. Subscribe before we start, because this is a job with a closing window, and I would rather you hear it now than 3 weeks after the ground has frozen. Number 1. Do the zone math, because it decides everything else. The rule is consistent across extension services from Pennsylvania to Illinois to the Brooklyn Botanic Garden. For a plant to overwinter outdoors in a container, it should be hardy to 2 zones colder than the zone you actually garden in. So work yours out right now. If you are in zone 7, you need plants rated to zone 5 to leave them out. Zone 6, you need zone 4. Zone 5, you need zone 3. Then, go and walk your containers and sort them into 2 groups. Plants that clear that bar and plants that do not. Everything that clears it can stay outside with some protection. Everything that does not either comes inside or gets serious intervention, and I will cover both. And I want to be honest about one thing here. If you garden in zone 4 or colder, overwintering containers outdoors is genuinely difficult, and extension guidance says so directly. It is not impossible, but you should expect to lose some, and you should plan around bringing the valuable ones in rather than gambling with them. One more detail that matters more than it sounds. Bigger pots survive better than small ones. That is not about the plant. It is about volume. A large container holds more growing media, more media holds more thermal mass, and more thermal mass means the temperature inside swings less violently and freezes more slowly. If you have a choice about which pot something spends the winter in, choose the biggest one you have. Number 2, water them, and keep watering them. This is the one that catches almost everybody because it is the exact opposite of what feels right. Autumn arrives, the plant stops growing, the leaves drop, and you stop watering. Reasonable. The plant looks finished, so you treat it as finished. But those roots have not gone dormant. Illinois Extension makes the point plainly. Even after the above-ground growth has shut down for the year, the roots continue to take up water. A container plant going into winter can genuinely die of thirst inside a frozen pot while you assume it is asleep. And there is a second reason that is even more important, and it is physics rather than biology. Moist growing media freezes more slowly than dry media and holds its temperature better once frozen. Water carries far more thermal mass than dry compost does, so a well-watered pot resists temperature swings that a dry pot simply cannot. Extension advice on this is blunt. Do not let a container go into winter with dry soil. There should be moisture in that media when it freezes. So the rule is this. Water your containers well before the ground freezes, and then keep checking them through winter. Not every week, but on mild spells and during long, dry stretches. A container under an eave or against a wall can go months without receiving a drop of natural precipitation, and that is exactly where plants desiccate. Evergreens in particular need watching because they keep losing moisture through their foliage all winter while their roots sit in frozen media unable to replace it. That is winter burn, and it is dehydration rather than cold damage. Number 3, move them, group them, or bury them. You have 4 options and they run from easiest to most effective. The first is to relocate. Get containers off exposed terraces, rooftops, and open patios and move them against a building, into a corner, under a pergola, anywhere that blocks wind and shelters them from winter sun. The north or east side of a house is usually better than the south because you want stable cold rather than a daily freeze-thaw cycle driven by winter sunshine. The second is to group them. Push all your pots together into one tight cluster and put the most cold-sensitive plants at the center, surrounded by the hardier ones. A cluster of containers behaves like one much larger container. The outer pots take the temperature swing, and the inner ones are buffered by everything around them. This costs nothing, and it works. The third option is the most effective one available outdoors, and hardly anyone does it. Sink the pot into the ground. Dig a hole in a spare bed, drop the container in up to its rim, and backfill around it. You have just given that plant everything an in-ground plant has. The surrounding earth insulates the root zone from every side, and the whole two-zone problem simply disappears. Lift it out in spring. It looks like too much work, and it is the single most reliable thing on this list. The fourth is indoor storage. And this is where people go wrong by being too generous. An unheated garage, a shed, or a cold basement is ideal. But the temperature target is specific. Illinois Extension puts the window at 20 to 45 degrees. That upper limit matters. Many perennials require a genuine cold dormancy in order to flower properly the following year, and a garage that sits at 60 degrees does not deliver that. You get a plant that never properly shuts down, burns through its reserves, and comes out weak in spring. So it needs to be cold, just not freezing solid. And there is a timing rule attached. Do not move plants into storage too early. Wait until temperatures have dropped to around 40 to 50 degrees and the plant has dropped its leaves and gone dormant. You want it fully shut down before it goes into the dark. Moving a plant that is still active into a cold, dark garage is how you get rot rather than dormancy. If any of this is useful, hit like, one tap, and it puts this in front of somebody who is about to lose a pot they have had for years. Number 4, insulate the pot, not the plant. This is the mental shift that changes how you approach the whole job. Almost every instinct people have about winter protection is aimed at the top of the plant. Fleece over the foliage, wrapping the branches, covering the crown. But we have already established that the top of the plant is the hardy part. The roots are the vulnerable part, so the protection needs to be aimed at the container itself. Wrap the pot. Bubble wrap works, and so does burlap, hessian, old blankets, straw stuffed into a wire cage around the outside. 2 or 3 layers around the sides of the container, secured with twine. Leave the top open so water can still get in and air can circulate at the surface. You are not trying to keep it warm. You are trying to slow the rate at which the media inside changes temperature, because it is the violent swings that do the damage rather than the steady cold. Mulch the surface too. A few inches of straw, shredded leaves, or bark over the top of the media adds another layer over the crown, though keep it clear of the stems themselves. And if you have evergreens in containers, consider a burlap screen on the windward side, or an anti-desiccant spray. Wind is what strips moisture out of evergreen foliage in winter, and a screen costs almost nothing. Number 5, fix the drainage and save the pot while you are at it. There are 2 separate problems here, and they solve together. The first is that waterlogged media plus freezing temperatures is genuinely lethal. Wet media expands as it freezes, and that expansion tears root tissue apart at a cellular level. A plant that would have survived cold in moist media dies in saturated media. So before winter, check that every drainage hole is actually clear and functioning, and get the pot up off the ground. Feet, bricks, offcuts of timber, anything that lifts the base an inch clear. A container sitting flat on a paved surface blocks its own drainage, and then that trapped water freezes underneath it. The second problem is the container itself. Terracotta and porcelain are porous and inflexible, which is a bad combination in freezing weather. Water gets absorbed into the material, freezes, expands, and splits the pot. That is why so many people find their favorite terracotta planter cracked in half in February. So for anything staying outside, use plastic, resin, fiberglass, thick wood, or a frost-proof glazed pot. Empty your terracotta, clean it, turn it upside down, or store it under cover, and bring it back out in spring. And one last thing to stop doing right now, which is fertilizing. Feeding a container plant in autumn pushes soft new growth at exactly the point the plant should be hardening off and shutting down. That soft tissue does not survive the first hard freeze, and the damage becomes an entry point for rot. Stop feeding, let the plant wind down, and let it go into winter properly dormant. So let us pull the whole thing together. Your container plants are experiencing roughly 2 hardiness zones colder than the ground beside them, because roots are the least cold hardy part of any plant, and a pot removes the insulation they evolved to rely on. 1. Do the math. Subtract 2 zones from yours, and sort every pot into stays out or comes in. Use the biggest containers you have. 2. Water them well before the freeze, and check them through winter. Moist media freezes slower and holds temperature better, and the roots keep drinking long after the top has gone to sleep. 3. Move them somewhere sheltered, group them tightly with the tender ones in the middle, sink the pots into the ground if you can, or store them somewhere between 20 and 45 degrees once the plant has gone properly dormant. 4. Insulate the container rather than the foliage. Wrap the sides, mulch the surface, screen the evergreens from wind. 5. Clear the drainage holes, lift the pots off the ground, and get anything terracotta emptied and put away before it cracks. And stop feeding them now. None of that takes a whole weekend. Most of it is an afternoon, and the difference it makes is not marginal. It is the difference between the same plants coming back next spring and a stack of empty pots. 3 quick things before you go. Subscribe and hit the bell because everything here is timed, and the container job that matters in March is a completely different one. Drop a comment telling me your zone and the one container plant you are most worried about losing, because I would genuinely like to know what people are trying to carry through and somebody else reading it is worrying about the same plant. And hit like if the 2-zone thing was new to you, because I suspect a lot of people have been losing plants for years and blaming themselves for it. Now go and look at the tag on your most valuable container plant. Whatever zone it says, subtract 2. If the answer is colder than where you live, that plant needs help this month, and you have got maybe 3 or 4 weekends left to give it.